A quick introduction into social engineering. Social engineering is an act of hacking human interest and emotion. Obviously, okay, still cyber criminals still get to hack their systems, but without them knowing which extends to them giving out very sensitive and confidential information since they've been psychologically manipulated. Okay. First topic that we'll look at is why are social engineering threats in the present age? Why are social engineering attacks still a threat in the present age? By looking at some of the examples. First of all, I'll talk through a disclaimer. I'll read through it. The hacking tools presented in these slides are open source, legal, and solely developed by security experts for learning purposes and penetration testing on systems that they are authorized to attack. Although the tools can be compromised to gain unauthorized access into systems and people's confidential info. The first tool is PyPhisher. PyPhisher is actually a phishing tool. It's sometimes known as a credential harvester, since it's actually a web page that when loaded on the browser, it prompts you for very sensitive and confidential information. Can also be used as a substitute for online credit card schemas, since it harvests credit card information and sends it to an evil server. The next tool would be Beef XSS, which is an XSS framework. XSS stands for cross-site scripting, which involves injecting evil code into web pages. And whenever that web page is loaded onto the browser gets hooked. And the attacker is able to execute commands on their behalf that involves sharing your camera, that involves sending you pop-up links, as well as sending you fake software updates, plugins that when installed on your machine will actually download payloads or backdoors into your machine. The other tool is Villian or Hawk Shell. Yeah, they pretty much mean the same thing. They actually generate Windows and Linux undetectable backdoors that bypasses most of the AVs, such that when executed on the target PC, it gives remote full access over the PowerShell. And PowerShell is actually more superior than the Windows command line, since the Windows command line is very much restricted only running console applications and text commands. As for PowerShell, it actually has more added advantages. Can actually connect to online cloud Microsoft products, can run any type of programs, and moreover, PowerShell gives more administrative rights than the command line. Next up, take a dive into the PyFisher framework. A PyFisher framework is a framework used to generate fake web pages that look pretty much like regular sites that we normally visit. It can be WhatsApp, it can be Facebook, it can be Amazon, it can be TikTok. And whenever the site prompts you for login information, the PyFisher framework generated web page actually sends a post request into the evil server, which then captures your credentials and stores them in a text file. Most of the PyFisher generated web pages are actually hosted on trusted domains, which can range anywhere from cloudflare.com and ngrok. And they are actually HTTPS URLs, of which the browser will not flag them as malicious sites. They also SSL and TLS certificate cleared, since the SSL and TLS encryption protocols only secure the end-to-end encryption between the server and the client, in which, in that case, the handshake is only between the client and the server, and there's no middleman in between to try to intercept the datagrams. And the next tool that we'll take a look at is actually the Beef XSS framework, but this time around in more details. Since, as like I've said before, Beef is actually an XSS framework, which is cross-site scripting, which involves injecting malicious code into web pages. Beef XSS does not work on web pages that were developed using React and Angular, since they provide a protection mechanism against this kind of XSS attacks. XSS attacks are not limited to Beef. There's one that's named Toxin XSS. Another one is referred to as Reflected XSS. But in this takeaway, we'll only focus on the Beef XSS. Okay, the Beef XSS is actually executed by injecting the following script, JavaScript hook code, into a web pages. Obviously, it has to be vulnerable web pages. And cyber criminals intently make these web pages vulnerable because they know that browsers don't have total control over the hook. And whenever loaded on the browser, it will actually establish a reverse connection into the target browser. Beef is configured by default to listen for incoming connections from the target machine on port 3000. However, it can also be configured to listen on different ports. In this case, in this example, Beef is actually listening on the local host, in which the hook page is actually restricted into loading on the local network, on the private host. To expose the Beef XSS framework, malicious codely injected sites into the internet, we can make use of services such as port forwarding and SSH tunneling. Last but not least, I'd like for us to take a look at the Villian Hochschild framework. Villian Hochschild framework is actually a new generation of reverse PowerShells payloads, aka backdoors. These ones are very much powerful as compared to the Metasploit payloads, which are mostly used in penetration testing. The Villian or the Hochschild framework has been tested against the fully updated Windows 11 Enterprise, the Windows Server 2016 Data Center, and the Windows 10 Pro boxes. It has bypassed some of the most poorly rated antivirus programs. The bespoke Microsoft Defender, which was previously known as the Windows Defender, the Norton AV, the Bitdefender, and the Mac F3. The generated reverse shell payloads can even run in PowerShell constrained language mode. PowerShell constrained language mode is actually the restricted PowerShell mode that's mainly used for administrative tasks in enterprise. And the generated payloads can even be executed even by users with limited privileges. The Hochschild framework can be detected by antivirus programs, especially when it is obfuscated. We'll take a look at the term obfuscate in a moment. This is actually a penetration testing demo of the Villian payload. I abducted this Linux terminal or terminator snippet from the Git repository of the Villian framework. Since, like I said before, it's actually an open source. Okay, now the Villian framework has an internal server that is bound to listen on port 65001 and an engine listening on port 8080. It actually generates both the Windows and the Linux payloads. And here you can specify the type of payloads that you would like to generate. There's also an additional command called obfuscate. Obfuscate is to actually modify the original payload that was generated Hawk Shell or VLine actually has a built-in tool that does that, since the original generated script will always be detected by the antivirus programs. What it does, it actually alters the PowerShell script inside in order to trick the antivirus programs into not detecting the malicious script. Once the VLAN framework has been configured properly, the host has been specified, the operating system to generate the payload for has been specified, of which in this case is actually the Windows operating system. It will generate a PowerShell script in which this PowerShell script can be used to create a reverse PowerShell. And when that reverse PowerShell is actually executed on the target computer, the VLAN framework will actually load the payload jobs to load the sessions. As you can see in this case, the backdoor session has been established on which it will actually is seen on the attacker's machine and actually specify the session ID once it has been executed on the target machine. Oh. And once it has been executed, it actually has the direct clone of the entire PowerShell command of the target machine. Okay, now here we're going to take a look of some of the security defense mechanism against pie phishing, beef XSS, social engineering attacks. Firstly, our QR codes. QR codes are not safe against all phishing attacks, but they're actually safe against the pie phishing attacks. We have two-factor authentication, the app blocker extensions, as well as the 3D secure payments. And it's also very crucial to understand the endpoint domains, since whenever browse through the web, every site that you visit has a URL path, which is prefixed by the domain, of which is entirely possible to clone a specific domain unless it's actually a URL shared domain, of which whenever you click on it, it will actually reveal the real domain that the site is actually hosted on. I'd like to take a look at the growing AI in social engineering. Firstly, we have deepfakes. Deepfakes are actually AI-generated media files ranging from audio, videos, and images. And they look really authentic. And they can actually be used to engineer social attacks against victims, since they really look authentic. For example, suppose that your WhatsApp has been hacked. What then attacker would do is actually use deepfakes in cloning your voice and then send voice notes to someone whom you trust and get them to share sensitive and confidential information with them, since they'll assume that it's you. I'd also like to take a look at influence bots. Influence bots are actually fake online social media accounts with many fake likes. Since many people follow these influencer bots on social media, they might actually be prompted by them to click on malicious links, download Trojans onto their PCs, since they assume that their accounts are actually authentic. And lastly, I'd like to take a look at ChatGPT. With the potential of ChatGPT, it can actually create more convincing and more professional phishing emails. I asked ChatGPT on how it can be utilized in performing social engineering attacks. And what it says is that people can abuse it by creating fake customer support chat groups, by impersonating a popular brand, which will then prompt their victims into sharing very sensitive information. But that can only take place once ChatGPT has been integrated with many various systems, such as influencer bots, in which is actually going to be an auto reply chatbot that will share some intelligent advice. And lastly, I'd like to look at how to know when we are safe from social engineering attacks. I'd say that the best way is to stay educated about social engineering and its latest trends. Secure your devices. Always confirm the links and the sources that you interact with on your device. And the social engineering attacks, always prey on those who ignore their red flags and don't even think twice before clicking on a message link or an email link. You can all be safe from social engineering attacks by being cautious of the stuff that we interact with over the internet, because it's always a race between the attackers and the defenders. The most people who are more exposed to social engineering attacks are those who are not educated about the field. That's the reason why it's very important to stay up to date with the field, all of its latest trends, and where it's actually headed to in the long run. Stay safe from social engineering attacks. I thank you.